Are Villa good enough for the top four? Because they're in such great form at the minute. And their win against Newcastle this weekend, 3-0, is probably the most comprehensive Villa victory I think I've seen in a long time. And I think Myles would concur with that. So where else to start but with you, mate? Wow, what a performance, first of all. Are you actually dreaming of the Champions League now, or is that well out of reach, do you think?
Yeah, I could just sit and smile for the rest of the podcast, but it's not really a good audio feature for anyone listening elsewhere. It's fantastic. We've talked for the last few weeks about Villa aspiring towards creeping into Europe late on in the season, but the more our form continues, the higher our aspirations become. It's still a long shot for us to get into maybe even the Europa League in some ways, let alone the Champions League, but we've put ourselves in the conversation, and I can't believe we're even talking about that at this stage of the season when you look at where we've come from.
It's, I mean, there's so many things you can point out about this particular performance that stood out. But
yeah.
I'm going to go back to you, Myles, in a moment with an Ollie Watkins zoom in if we can. But I'll go back to you first of all, Dave, just to say, wow, Villa were great, weren't they? From a neutral perspective, great to watch against the Newcastle team that have been really difficult to score against. How did Villa carve them open so easily, do you think?
Yeah, and I think just the way that they did actually take Newcastle apart was so impressive in itself. And a Newcastle team that have been in, banging form, been so consistent, throughout the season. We've kind of been waiting to see what team's going to take them apart, because they've really gone toe to toe with most of the big teams in the league. And this is the first time really that we've seen Newcastle so comprehensively beaten. It doesn't really spring to mind another result where they've actually been so soundly beaten, and that you can only say that's just so brilliant to say. I imagine for Villa fans, just to see how well they did perform in this game. I thought in all of their goals were really impressive. I thought the last one, Alex Moreno, I thought he played a really good part in the third goal. And we were talking, weren't we, over the weekend, Myles, and you were just saying like how impressive they were, how everyone just played so well. There wasn't really a bad performance.
No, there wasn't a single player that was below an 8 out of 10. And only the ones that were 8 were the ones that probably didn't have to do as much. Like Ashley Young was really quiet in the game, but he didn't really have to do too much other than just lead by example, as he always does. The rest of the team all performed to an incredibly high level. Even Leander Dendoncker came in, and I've been a little bit critical of him as a player that I thought was an odd sign-in, but with Kamara injured, he stepped in and he was phenomenal at the weekend. I think he only misplaced one pass for the entire game. He just read the game incredibly well. The same goes for Ramsey as well. That midfield was where Villa won the game. And actually, that's one of the areas that you would have considered Newcastle's strongest. Like Bruno Guimaraes really struggled to get into the game. We didn't see much of them getting the ball forward to Isak. When he did, he looked quite lively. But defensively, Villa was so sound. There was a little joke at the end of the match where Mings went up to the interviewer and said, well, that the match award must be for me. And to be honest, there could have been a queue of Villa players behind him asking for that. Mings was outstanding, threw himself in front of everything again. And with Southgate watching on, he has to be one of the first names on the next England squad, alongside, of course, the man of the moment for Aston Villa, Ollie Watkins, who was unplayable.
I was going to interject on Watkins because he's playing with the kind of swagger that you rarely see from many players, really. I mean, Marcus Rashford recently has played with a similar kind of verve, hasn't he, going forward? But everything he does seems so precise, so controlled, so well thought out. He's always reading the game a step ahead, and you can see what his next move is going to be or what he should do, and he executes it brilliantly every time. So it must be great for you to see Ollie Watkins in such a rich vein of form and almost becoming like a class above where what we saw from him even last season, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really nice conversation to keep having because it's not a temporary sort of raise in form. It seems like it's just his game has come on under Emery. And that's the most important thing, that it's going to be a consistent thing. We're now talking about a sample size of almost 4 months where he's been, bar Erling Haaland, who's posting alien numbers, the best player in the Premier League when it comes to goal contributions. No one else has contributed to as many goals as him, bar Erling Haaland. That's absolutely ridiculous for a player like Watkins, who has been so selfless for Aston Villa in the past. And he said himself that the big turning point is him being able to progress more, make more selfish runs and be in the goal-scoring positions he needs to be in. And it's working for him. You can see his confidence is at a whole new level. The fact that very often he picks the ball up and he's looking for the opportunity at goal. His first goal, for example, the turn, I think it's Botman. He just sits down.
Yeah.
He doesn't even think about it. He knows where the goal is instinctively. And actually, I was almost more impressed with Ramsey's goal and Watkins' contribution to that. The way he hung in the air, it wasn't just a case of keeping the ball alive. You can watch. He looks where Ramsey is and he places it. And it's such a hard skill to be able to get yourself to that sort of angle and get the ball down in such a manner that a player in his run of form right now with that kind of confidence is willing to take that on. It's superb. He could have had a hat-trick. He hit the post. Pope saved one with his feet. He had one disallowed for offside. But he looked unplayable in this game. There was nothing Newcastle could do to contain him. Yeah. And that's the kind of forward that Villa have always wanted. And it's something we've lacked for years. Agbonlahor is still our record Premier League goal scorer. At this rate, Watkins will take that by the end of next season, I'd imagine. He's been outstanding. And you can say that about a lot of the squad. So many of them have stepped up under Emery.
Yeah, well, I joked at the start, really, just to get a reaction, really, that top four was realistic. But I mean, the form that Villa are in, it's not exactly fanciful either. You look at the table, Dave, and you see the likes of Newcastle dropping points in a big game like this. That's why it was such a huge statement. Also, Tottenham looking really out of sorts, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can only really see maybe Brighton that are on a par for form, really, or very close to them, and maybe challenging for, an outsider for the Champions League. So, as a Man United fan, also up amongst it in the top four, are Villa a threat? I mean, I think they're 6 points behind Newcastle at the minute, and they've got a game to play. But what a statement this game is, really, in that pursuit.
I think they've got to keep doing what they're doing and take it game by game. I think the next two games are going to be pivotal to that. They've got to really see where they are after these next two games, which you would probably expect them to beat Brentford. Fulham might be a tough game, but you'd kind of want them to win that as well, considering how they've been with their form. You'd think they'd be favourites. If they win those two games, then they can then look at the run-in, look at how other teams have... Because other teams at the top are dropping points left, right and centre, so we don't know where they will be. It sounds daft, but even after two games, if they win these next two games and other teams around them drop points again, it just changes the whole kind of, obviously, perspective of how the league table looks. So we'll see what happens. The last 5 games are quite difficult in the league. They've obviously got United, they've got Wolves, which you probably anticipate them to win that, but obviously it's a derby. Spurs, Liverpool and Brighton. So that last game of the league season could be huge. A massive game, really.
Can I just say, though?
Go.
We've beaten United under Emery already. We've beaten Spurs under Emery already. So even the more challenging looking games, I don't feel a lack of confidence about them. There are very few teams in the league that Villa would have to play right now where I wouldn't feel like we could go and get a win. I mean, Man City are a juggernaut that are taking apart everyone right now. We know that Arsenal-Villa was an incredibly tight game and that could have gone a different way, but that's always going to be a big challenge. Other than that, I fancy us against anyone right now, I'll be totally honest. And we're not the only one with difficult fixtures. Newcastle are 6 points ahead of us, but they could really easily get pulled into it. They've got such a weird dynamic of fixtures, Newcastle, because they've either got teams right at the top or right at the bottom. So you imagine they'll pick up some points, but they've got Spurs at the weekend. If those two draw that game...
Perfect. I had a look, and I think every single team that Newcastle play until the end of the season are all playing for something. It's either Champions League or relegation candidates, and the only team that is kind of caught in the middle is Chelsea on the last day of the season. That's it.
No, they're relegation. No, honestly, it would be ridiculous for Villa to be anywhere near the top 4 come the last couple of weeks of the season. I don't look at it and go, I think we're favourites, but I wouldn't write us off either. Yeah, there's a really famous quote that Villa fans love about, do you want to bet against us? And right now, I don't think anyone would. No. I think this result of the weekend just opened the race up a little bit. And I think actually we probably did a couple of other teams a favour. I think Brighton and Liverpool are kind of in the conversation again now. Yeah. Liverpool are 6 points behind Villa, but they've got 2 games in hand as well. So if they can pick up form, maybe they go back into the conversation as well. It was just a massive result for the league as a whole. And I like seeing it shaken up. The fact that we were even having a conversation now, I'm happy with it. We could finish 6th, 7th. It's still a phenomenal achievement.
Well, I was going to say Unai Emery has put on record, hasn't he, and said that top 6 is now the new goal. Yeah. And I think you look at the table, you do see Brighton and Liverpool behind and actually looking at close contenders to that. But in 5th place, you've got a Tottenham Hotspur team that are only 3 points ahead. And they look like a realistic team to drop out of that top 6 at the moment, don't they? So for Villa, I think top 5 probably is more realistic. 5th place would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
I think by the time we play Spurs, we'll go above them. Honestly, I can't. Spurs
Feels
are
that way.
terrible. Spurs are terrible, really. They've got a couple of great players, but as a team, they're awful. We'll talk about them in a bit, I'm sure. But you just want to start dragging teams into the conversation. That's what we did this weekend. Yeah. That's what we've got the chance to do for the rest of the season. I think we're fortunate in that Bournemouth and Fulham are probably out of those conversations now. So having those two in our next couple of games, they're probably the most on the beach teams that we'll come up against, really, now. After that, look, if you want to get to the top 4, this is how you do it. It's a difficult route. And if you look at Villa's last 8 fixtures, we're unbeaten. We've won 7, drawn 1, only conceded 2. That's incredibly stable. So we're doing things right at the back as well as going forward. It would be hard to sustain that for another 8 games or 7 games, what we've got left now. But why can't we? I think this Villa team is proving a lot of people wrong. There was a video that went out recently from a big football publication about Villa's XG stats that got a lot of Aston Villa fans upset because the suggestion was that we're outperforming our XG and it's been luck. It isn't luck. We've got a world-class coach who knows how to play a system. We've got a world-class goalkeeper who proved himself again in this game. That's why we're outperforming our XG against us. We've got a striker in the best form of his career. That's why we're improving on our XG4 as well. That's not luck. That's genuine skill, class and talent that Emery is helping to develop. I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I think potential manager of the season contender, I think. Depending on how Arsenal and their season pans out, he's definitely one that's made one of the biggest impacts I've seen at a new club ever in the Premier League.
Absolutely.
And, it's not even a fluke either because it's been such a sustained run now. So
he's a phenomenal
play to Aston Villa.
Yeah.